So last night, for the ones who weren't here, I did a little bit of my testimony and let you know where I came from, which was a very broken, dysfunctional home. And it's important that you understand that, because what I talk about today is really my revelation that God taught me as he was bringing me out of my dysfunctionality into the world that he brought me into. Because I had a heart and a desire to do more for God. I wanted to do things for God. I really wanted to be a CEO of a small company. That was the direction that I wanted to go. God didn't see fit to send me that way, but he did give me a lot of experiences along the way. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today, is how I got there. So if you remember Miss Annie last night, she was in the coma for 30 years, and we talked about the lost years. Not so much that we walk around in a spiritual coma, but I think any man in here can look back and see lost years, whether it's with your kids. I worked a lot when some of my kids were small, and I missed a lot of that time, and I never get that time back. The time that I travel with business, the time that I'm on the road. So whether you want to call it a spiritual coma or not, I think all men have to deal with the lost years and the lost time. So as we keep moving forward, we're going to hopefully examine the heart and begin to realize that the lost years take a toll on us, I think. But at the end of the day, we do our best we can for our family and our God, right? That's all a man can do. So when you look at Joseph, I had Father Bill read that. Did you ever sit and think and wonder, why Joseph? Why Joseph? Why David? And we'll talk about in the next session, I think seeing the world through God's eyes is a lot different than seeing it through ours, because we have a tendency to elect and select leaders that are good-looking, talented, have a lot of money, right? That's kind of how the world judges success. If you want to make it in the speaking circuit, you kind of have to be wealthy, because the world says if you made a lot of money, then you're successful. But if you look at in God's economy, it's completely different. He chooses people for what I think sometimes is a mystery. But Joseph is one of them, because here Joseph is a very young, snot-nosed kid, right? And isn't it interesting that God gave him a vision that he gave to his brothers that precipitated this entire event that ultimately was also the gift that got him to rise to the power position that he was in. So growing up, I didn't have anybody teach me about authority. And I think authority is a foundation of the heart, because as men, it's what we struggle with. So did I give somebody Genesis 1 to read? Read Genesis 1:26.
Then God said, "Let us make man in our own image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth."
So here we go. Why is it that men struggle with authority and the heart? Well, I think it goes all the way back to Genesis 1:26. God created us to have dominion over the earth. And then when a fallen world occurs, that dominion and that desire to be in charge kind of starts to go off the track. And I think a lot of the ills that we have in church and society has to do with our inability to handle authority. Because when you look at the heart and what God looks for, I'm convinced now more than ever, he looks for a heart that's open, that he can teach and mold, so that the heart then can work and function under God's authority the way he wants it to function. And that's why he probably chose Joseph. It wasn't that Joseph was brilliant or rich, but that he knew that he could mold Joseph into somebody that could handle authority. And so the next verse is what? Proverbs 27:19.
As in water, face reflects face, so the heart of man reflects man.
So there we have it again, right? The heart reflects what a man is. That's why I think it's so very important. Who's got the next one? Jeremiah 17:9 and 10.
The heart is more deceitful than all else, and is desperately sick. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the heart. I test the mind, even to give to each man according to his ways, according to the results of his deeds.
So again, right, only one person is capable of judging and seeing the heart of man, and that would be God. And so we struggle with this, right? Don't we? If we're honest with ourselves as men, we struggle with this. Our heart is wicked. I know what I'm capable of doing if I was left unchecked. And so here I am in this constant struggle, trying to serve God, but also fighting against my desire to be in charge and to dominate. And then 1 Samuel 16:7.
But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For God sees not as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart."
All right, so God looks at the heart. And that was frightening to me as a young man growing up, because I grew up, I didn't have a father figure, and I didn't have anybody really to teach me what healthy authority was, or really what a healthy heart was. I was just doing my best to base it on my peers and seeing my mom married 4 times and the struggle in the family of my mom and the husband fighting over who was going to be in charge. Next one.
It is not what enters into the mouth that defiles a man, but what proceeds out of the mouth. This defiles the man. Peter said to him, "Explain the parable to us." Jesus said, "Are you still lacking in understanding also? Do you not understand that everything that goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is eliminated? But the things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and those defile the man. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, slanders."
All right, so once again, right, out of the heart of a man, really reflects who he is as a person. And then I think we have one more, which is Proverbs 15:11.
Sheol and Abaddon lie open before the Lord. How much more the hearts of men?
All right, so here we have the condition. God sees the heart of man. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I struggle sometimes with keeping my heart pure and honest motives, because I lie to myself and I justify why I do certain things. Maybe some of you do too. And it's easy when you go down that path, right? It's why I might fudge on my taxes. Well, it's just the federal government, and I can justify a lot of the things that I do. But when we really begin to understand that God looks at the heart for the ones that he chooses to do great things for his kingdom, that was the realization that I had. And I wanted to do great things for God's kingdom. I just didn't know how to do it. But I knew my heart needed to be fixed was number one. And that's the easy part, I think, is salvation. But then the challenge comes in the growth, right? It's the action. It's actually letting God go to work. So as we go forward, there's going to be 3 questions that I would like us to ponder. And we'll break up next session and talk about a little bit more in groups of 2 or 3. But have you ever thought about, how did David deal with King Saul? And authority, right? That's a good study if you want to know how to deal with authority, because I think this might be out of order. I think the best way to measure where a man's heart is to look at how they deal with authority. And so when Father Bill and I when I was really young, Father Bill was in his 30s, I think, we went down to Redwood Christian Park and we saw a speaker called Bob Vernon. He was a deputy chief of police for LA County. And he spoke on authority, and it was the first time in my life I'd ever heard any message on authority. And I remember it was a watershed moment for me, because I finally understood what healthy authority looks like and what unhealthy authority looks like. And so the reason why I put this up here with the heart and why I'm talking so much about authority is because a wise man once said, if you want to test the character of the man, don't give him money, give him power. And see how he responds when he has authority or power. And that will be the true test of a man's character. And so as we go through this, these are the examples. I mean, how did Joseph deal with Potiphar, right? Think about that. Here he is in Potiphar's house doing well. But why is he doing well? He must have submitted to Potiphar's authority, right? He must have figured out a way to work his talent and skill in such a way. I'm sure he didn't necessarily agree with the Egyptian culture, right? But he figured out a way to submit to Potiphar's authority, as did David, right? When David's in the wilderness, how many times did he have a chance to kill King Saul? Several, right? What did he do each time? He didn't do it. Why? He respected him as king, and he respected the authority that Saul had over him, even though Saul was a corrupt and evil man. And then the last one I have up there for you is when the centurion approached Jesus. Do you remember that story? He comes to Jesus, and what does he say? Jesus says, "Take me to your house," right? What did the centurion say? You don't have to go. Why? Because you have the authority, and I too am a man under authority. I say to this one, go, this one stays. So just say the word, and my daughter will be healed. And we're going to look at a lot of scripture for authority, because I think authority is foundational to truly have any strong influence in this world, be it church, work, or anywhere else. It all comes back to how you deal with authority, because a lot of people want to lead, right? Haven't we always, we meet people, everybody wants to be king. But what they don't want to do necessarily is pay the price to become a person capable of being king. They don't want to pay the price of character development to get there. And that's where we face, I think that's where the men in society face today. We all want to be in charge, but we don't want to subject ourselves under authority to learn how to be in charge. And so for me to have a successful marriage, for me to be a successful parent, for me to be successful in all the things I've done, I think it's all tied back to me having to learn how to wrestle with authority. So let's take a biblical view of authority and actually see all the scriptures that point to that. And this is where I handed out a lot of scriptures. So let's begin.
So the Lord said to Moses, "Take Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him, and have him stand before Eleazar the priest, and before all the congregation, and commission him in their sight. You shall put some of your authority on him, in order that all the congregation of the sons of Israel may obey him. Moreover, he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire for him by the judgment of the Urim before the Lord. At his command they shall go out, and at his command they shall come in, both he and the sons of Israel with him, even all the congregation." Moses did just as the Lord commanded him, and he took Joshua and set him before Eleazar the priest and before all the congregation. Then he laid his hands on him and commissioned him, just as the Lord had spoken through Moses.
All right, so why did he have power, authority? Because Moses gave him some of his authority. All right, how about the next one?
And when Jesus entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, imploring him, and saying, "Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, fearfully tormented." Jesus said to him, "I will come and heal him." But the centurion said, "Lord, I am not worthy for you to come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my slave, 'Do this,' and he does it."
And why does the centurion have authority? Because he's under authority. Why do police officers have authority? Because they're under authority, right? So everything in God's kingdom is about placing ourselves under the authority that he appoints. How about Matthew 10:1?
Jesus summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits, to cast them out, and to heal every kind of disease and every kind of sickness.
Isn't that interesting? Why could the disciples heal again? Because Jesus gave them the authority to do so. How about Luke 4:6?
And the devil said to him, "I will give you all this domain and its glory, for it has been handed over to me, and I give it to whomever I wish."
And then Acts 2:26, 9, and 10.
So then I thought to myself that I had to do many things hostile to the name of Jesus of Nazareth. And this is just what I did in Jerusalem. Not only did I lock up many of the saints in prisons, having received authority from the chief priests, but also when they were being put to death, I cast my vote against them.
And so even Saul was operating under whose authority? The chief priest. And then we round it out with, I think, Romans 13:1, which is a really hard verse for me. If we were to be honest with ourselves, who's got Romans 13:1?
Every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities, For there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God.
So if we truly understand that, if we really believe that every authority is put above us, then doesn't that change the way we view our bosses? How about the way we view a pastor? How about the way we view a state or local government? Right? Because if every position of authority is appointed by God, then if we rebel against that authority, ultimately, who are we rebelling against? We're rebelling against God. It's not that you're rebelling against the IRS. You're really rebelling against God. It's not that you're rebelling against a pastor. Who are you really rebelling against? It's rebelling against God. That's where the attitude of the heart, I think, comes into this so much, because it's really a heart of rebellion that I think most of us struggle with. And if we're honest and peel back the layers of the onions, I think you see it's really rebellion because I want to be in charge. I don't like taking orders from people. I don't like listening to my wife. I don't like listening to my children. I don't particularly like listening to a boss that I don't like working for, right? I can justify any number of reasons why he's an idiot, and I have the right to talk about him behind his back. Or how about a pastor that makes a decision that I don't like? Right? I just go around the congregation and try to build up a groundswell of support opposition to him. You know how many churches are split over that? And really, what's the root sin? It's rebellion. The root sin is rebellion. It's the same root sin that got Lucifer in trouble. And so when God looks at the heart, now when you go back and look at Joseph and David and the others, I think what you begin to see is really God chose people with a heart that he could mold and shape into doing great things for his kingdom. So this is the way Bob Vernon explained it, and it made a lot of sense to me. And you got to remember, as a young guy, I didn't know what healthy authority was. All I knew was my mom ran roughshod through the house, right? She yelled a lot, screamed a lot. Her and her many husbands argued a lot. My sister, my oldest sister, got married at 16 to get out of the house, which was rebellion. My youngest, my older, so I have my sister and my brother. He rebelled in his own way by being obstinate, and he got a lot of beatings because of it. My sister rebelled by being promiscuous. She just would not submit. And so I didn't really rebel in high school to that degree. I just was trying to figure this whole thing out. But this is what I knew from mentoring with Father Bill. I knew I wouldn't have a healthy relationship and a healthy family until I did figure out the authority thing. I had to figure this out because there was no way I was going to be a good dad or a good husband, or no way I was going to rise up in a workplace if I didn't figure this stuff out. So here's how he explained it. Basically, God's authority creates an umbrella. And if you stay under that umbrella, you're protected. It's when you step outside of the umbrella of authority that bad things begin to happen. So think of the rain. It's no different, right? If you stay under an umbrella, you stay dry. Get outside of that umbrella, and you begin to get very wet. So here's a real simple example to drive that point home. And we see it all the time, especially now with social media and cameras, right? So you have a police officer. And why do police officers have authority? Given to them from what? The people, right? Through the state law. That's the only reason a police officer has authority. Why do I have authority in the military? Because through the Constitution, right? Why does Father Bill have authority as a pastor? Because that's funny. Because there's always that structure that's above us. And as long as we stay under that, right, if the police see a bad guy and he shoots a bad guy with a gun, everything's good, right? But if the bad guy drops the gun and now he's unarmed and the police shoot him, what happens? It's a crime. What's the difference? Not under authority. In one case, they're operating under the legal authority that are given to them by the state, the local, or whatever. In the other example, they just took it on their own accord to do that. Now, if they're in the line of duty and they shoot and kill, who protects them? The state does. Everybody protects them. So if a family member doesn't like it or think it was wrong, they can take them to court, but they're really not suing the police officer, right? Who are they suing? They're suing the authority that gave them the ability to do that. But in this scenario, who do they end up suing? The individual, because he stepped out of the authority that he was given to do that, which is rebellion. Now, it's easy to see it here, but let's see it as a husband and wife, right? In the proper relationship of a husband and wife, right, the woman is supposed to what? Submit, but who's the husband supposed to submit to? Exactly. And that's where so much of the trouble comes in if you think about it. We get it kind of screwed up sometimes. We want to have the authority over our kids and our wife without necessarily subjecting ourselves to the authority of Christ. And when that occurs, what happens in the house? It's chaos, right? Because you have two people battling for authority and control. Now, how does a husband, and you guys are in a great Bible teaching church, how is a husband supposed to submit to God under the husband and wife relationship? As Christ loves the church, right? And Father Bill taught me that, my wife would become one of my best advisors that I had. And you don't do things unless you and your wife are synced up on it. You both pray about it, and if you can't come together in unison, then you just keep praying until you do. It's a partnership. But in this scenario, if one or both of those step outside of that umbrella, what begins to happen? It's division and chaos, and everybody pays a price for it. Let's look at one more. Right? How about work? How many in here have ever worked for a really nasty, mean, wicked boss? How pleasant is that? How pleasant is that? And what does Proverbs say about when the righteous are in charge? What happens? The people rejoice, but when the wicked rule, the people mourn. So if you've ever worked for a bad boss, it's hard to get up every morning and go in and give 100%, isn't it? Yeah, because we justify in our mind why we're okay to dog it. We justify in our mind why it's okay to do anything less than be excellent. But I'll point back to Joseph and David. When David was running for his life, living out in the desert, when he had opportunities to rebel, what decisions did he make? He chose to submit to Saul's authority, which is not an easy thing to do. Will you give me that? That is a very, very tough thing to do, and it's the thing that you can't do if you don't have a heart that God is shaping and molding into being a servant. Because I would argue to you that David didn't learn to be king in the castle. David learned to be king in the desert. Because that's where God shaped and molded his character day in and day out, making decisions when it didn't like it. Because David didn't like it, right? We're as much of a human as he was. Saul's throwing spears at him. What would I probably do? I'd probably throw them back. What did David do? He ran. He dodged and he ran. And Joseph is the same way. Think about Joseph. When he's thrown in the pit, he's angry, right? He's got to be mad. And then he's sold into slavery. You've been a 17-year-old kid before. How do you think Joseph would have responded? Anger. But obviously, God was able to work in his life, and he had a heart that God could mold and shape. And so Joseph became a man in Potiphar's house, in jail, being sold into slavery that was worthy to become second in charge of Egypt. And I think that's the message. So when we're working with a boss that's evil, we're going to talk about it in a minute. How we respond to that and how we see it really is the difference between our heart being shaped more like Christ and us staying in a state of rebellion, whether we realize it or not. Pastors. Pastors have one of the hardest jobs out there, right? Because if you have a congregation of 200, how many different opinions do you have? 400. That's right. You have at least 400, right? Everybody believes that their way is the right way. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next session about seeing things through God's eyes. Everybody believes their way is the right way. And if you don't do what I want, then obviously you're the one that's wrong and you need to change. Can you just hear the arrogance in that? But yet it goes on all the time in churches, and pastors have a very hard time because probably if Father Bill was honest, 80% of his time is just trying to quell all the different dissenting opinions that are pushing him to go here and go there. When in essence, who has responsibility to figure out the direction of the church? It's the pastor. And our job is to pray and give counsel, but not to rebel and start a wildfire of dissent in a church. And then I took the kids out. But I had one on children too. Because think about it. How about parents? What kind of authority do parents wield over most of their children? It's complete and authoritarian control. And how well does that work once they hit about 14? That's right. Because parents should be submitting to who? To God. Seeking wisdom, trying to figure out how to deal and how to love unconditionally their children and how to teach their children. One of the hardest things I had to do was learn to apologize to my children. That's not easy to do. I'm sorry for hurting you. I'm sorry for yelling at you. I'm sorry for fill in the blank of any number of things that I have done to hurt my children. But I think it's important because I think a big part of leadership is learning how to apologize when you are indeed wrong. Right? Because most humans, when they're wrong, what is their default response? An excuse and to justify it. Not my fault. I mean, just look at Washington today and that dysfunctional cesspool, right? Nobody will take responsibility for anything. And as we're paying the price for it, and I'm not trying to get into the political realm, but just everybody's blaming everybody else instead of going to work to fix the problems. And so what really is our call as Christians to do for leaders? Is to pray for them. Pray. That means if you like Trump, you pray for Trump. If you don't like Trump, you pray for Trump. That's our job. And then I think if Christians figure this out, and if God really starts to mold and shape our character, that's how we begin to develop influence in our communities, in our churches, in our families, in our places of work. It's by learning how to submit to authority and doing it in God's way, the proper way to do it. I've been in lots of organizations, well, actually two, that I lost my job because I didn't figure this out, and I was 100% right. See the irony of that? But it didn't matter. In one case, I found $130,000 a year that was being paid to a European company that I could find no contract to justify paying. I got rewarded by that one by being laid off because I wouldn't let it go. Because at the time in my life, I didn't understand how to work through proper authority chains. And I was convinced I was right, so young Dan Fisher at 20-some years old decides to go right to the president of the board because nobody would listen to me in the company. How do you think that played out? Not so great for Dan Fisher. And so I had to learn the hard way by losing jobs and destroying relationships. But my heart all along has always been I wanted to grow and I wanted to be a man capable of leading and influencing large organizations. It's a desire that I feel God placed inside me, not because, as I've searched my motives, it's not because I like the limelight, because I don't. I prefer to be sitting where you are a lot of times, but you don't really get to be in positions of influence by sitting in the corner, right? You've got to get out in front. You've got to do things. You've got to work hard. And so I wanted to be in powers of influence because I always wanted the ability to help affect an organization in a positive way. Taking care of people the way they should be taken care of, working towards the mission the way the mission should be taken care of, and ultimately making decisions that are better for the entire whole as opposed to what's good for me or for others. And so for me, this was a big deal, trying to learn to wrestle with this, trying to let God shape and mold my character, which is going to be the third session today that we talk about, and how hard that really is. Because it's easy to talk about it, right? Let's be honest. It's easy to talk about it. But how easy is it when your wife tells you you're doing something that she doesn't like? You want to talk about the rubber hitting the road, right? For us that have been married for a while? Or how about when a friend comes to you and challenges you on something that they think you're doing incorrectly? It's tough. And so that's why we're going to spend a whole segment talking about character development. But here's some self-evaluation for you that I'd like you to think about and write down. How do I react when a decision is made I don't agree with? Because I think that's really telling to where we are as Christians and where our heart is. Because what is the default human reaction when something's done that we don't agree with? Anger and lashing out at it. Well, that's stupid. Well, that's dumb. Who thought of that lame brain idea? But one of the things I've realized as I have advanced through leadership is that sometimes leaders are faced with two bad decisions. And no matter which way you go, what's going to ultimately be the decision? Yeah, a bad decision. I'm presented with two bad decisions. Anybody ever see the movie Master and Commander? Great movie if you haven't seen it. Phenomenal leadership movie, but there's a scene in there where the young boy gets washed overboard. And it's because of the pride of the captain that he drove the ship too hard in a storm. And so now the mast that he's on in the water is serving as an anchor pulling the ship down. So the captain is presented with the decision. He can either cut the rope and let the boy die, or leave the rope attached and risk losing the entire ship. Now, would you agree with me that both of those are bad decisions? So guess which one he chooses? He cuts the rope. And it's interesting because the camera cuts down into the belly of the ship and the 119 men that are down there. When they cut the rope and the ship rights itself, they all start cheering. And they're excited. But they don't understand that their salvation came at the cost of the captain having to basically murder a young boy. And so the lesson is, right, when you're faced with two bad decisions, either way you go is going to be bad. And I don't think sometimes we understand that. And so we're so quick to judge on why a leader made a decision without taking the time to try to understand or trust that, you know what, I disagree with the decision, but I probably need to better understand why he made it. Before you start throwing spears and we start going after, well, that person's just dumb. I found that very few people in authority are actually dumb. Most people who get there are trying hard, but they're humans just like everybody else is. And so I think that first question there really gives us a good judge of our heart and where we are in that walk. Number two, when you work for a boss you don't like, do you still work hard for him? Again, easy thing to do? No, right? Because it's tough to come to work when you don't like your boss and still give 100% effort. But I'd be willing to bet if you go back and could really look more into David and Joseph's life, I'd be willing to bet, what do you think those guys did? I'm thinking they probably still worked hard, knowing that they were working to God, not to man. Right? And then what's number three, the third question up there for self-reflection? You know, here's another self-evaluation. What do you talk about when you're with your friends? Do you talk about how bad the old lady is? You know, do you talk about how bad the pastor is? How stupid the teacher is? How dumb my boss is? Though, because if we go back to the scripture, remember, what comes out of the heart, what? What comes out of the mouth is what really is revealed in our heart. So when you talk about these things, it's really showing what the attitude of the heart is, in my opinion. This is what I've learned. And so for me, I had to go to work on this because I was a very bitter and angry young man who really didn't understand much of anything, who thought I was right in almost everything I did. And that's why Father Bill and Holly were such instrumental people in my life, because it was really through them that I began to see a lot of the healthy role model deal with authority played out. And then I just studied it on my own. In 1991, I began the journey. And I was working in both the civilian sector and growing as a Christian at the same time. And I began to see that really the parallels between being a Christian and being in the civilian sector is really no different. It's all development. It's all character. It's all authority. And so for me, Dan Fisher, this was stuff that I had to wrestle with and be honest with myself if I was going to grow. And so my encouragement to you as I close is write these questions down and really take an honest assessment of yourself with them. And if you don't like the answers, then really pay attention in the third section when we talk about character development. Because I will tell you, the lost years for me, it wasn't until I began to figure out authority that my career and my family and everything else started to take off, and I started to be blessed. And I'm convinced that the reason why I was blessed isn't because I was necessarily that good, but as the scripture says, a man who pleases the Lord, make even his enemies at peace with him. I believe as I learned to wrestle with authority, God began to open the doors for me to go and do many bigger things. And anyway, that's what I have for you today. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I look forward to talking about the next section with you, which is on the eye. So thank you.